Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Back to Basics. In this one, we are going to cover off conducting research. Now, Brenton, this is a topic that obviously we do on our weekly show. Fantasy Game Plan comes out every Monday during the NRL fantasy season because obviously we want to do some of the work for the listeners. But in this episode, we'll look behind the curtain and we want to, help our new coaches establish some research methods.
That's right, because as we've said in previous episodes, it's not just the typical NRL gun who formulates into a gun fantasy player. You need to do a bit of the research as well to see what their price is, what they've done in the past. Is it historically accurate? Is there underlying factors that may have them at an underprice or an overprice? And there is definitely websites where you can go and have a look at to conduct this research for yourself.
And that's what we're actually going to explore in this episode. So, again, going back to our pursuit of value, we need to conduct some research to help identify players that might have potential to build that value so we can build our squad value, score well, and have a fun season. And probably three main categories, and where we're going to go today is looking at statistical analysis and some methods and some considerations for that. We're touching on about keeping up with news and obviously digesting creator content, which, see, if you're watching this, you're actually doing that right now. But let's get into the statistical analysis because Brenton, essentially it's the primary method for research because as we've spoken about already, players are fantasy relevant based on how they accrue stats.
So exactly right, and that's where you can start doing your research on these websites as well to find out what their base stats are, what their PPMs are, which is points per minute, and what their break evens are to work out is this going to be the right move for my squad for the long term or even for the short term for the cash generation.
Yeah, and you touched on their points per minute, obviously, yep, those base stats. And then also as well, identifying how they've performed in the past and, there's certain roles that they've done really well at and some that haven't because not every single player is the same. We see some that playing out as an edge back rower score better than lock, whereas for some other players it'll be the other way around. But in terms of research, you alluded to it earlier, there's plenty of resources out there. Now, we're just going to point out one that's free, and that's the reason we're going to point that out. It's called NRL Fantasy Stats or footystatistics.com. We might even link it in the bio for this one. Tracks stats from all games from 2014, has the score, the minutes, the starting role they had, and the stats accrued. And I don't know about you, Brent, I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I found this website, since its inauguration, to be a very, very valuable resource.
It's been amazing, and shout out to the guys who run it as well, because they're doing it for free, doing it for the love of it. And it's super helpful. Whilst it's not probably 100% accurate, it gives you a great guide on how to work out what future planning that you need to make for your squad.
Yes, absolutely. So for those who haven't seen NRL Fantasy Stats before, this is what you would expect to see. And as we can see here, we've got a player's name, we've got the details about them, their price, the team, their positions. We've also got what they're currently priced at, their break even, their average PPMs generated there, and the ownership percentage. Now, what is interesting as well about this, Brenton, as you can see in the screenshot, is there's actually some filters there. So we've got the competition filter, we've got the year filter, position, over and under. Currently at the moment on this one, we can see that we've got that 2024 filter on Ruben Garrick, which, as we've spoken about already in this series, 43.7 is quite good, but if we apply filters for this, we might find ourselves another number that's quite interesting.
Exactly right, because there's always going to be certain outlying games that they have played where they get a head knock early, or they got injured, so they only played 40 minutes. So there's certain filters that you can use, uh, and for his position even. So Ruben Garrick's a perfect example of where he might score well on the wing, but scores better at centre, but scores even better at fullback. So you can use all of these to kind of predict what you think he's going to do in the role that you think he's actually going to be in.
Yes, and we can see obviously the zoom on this isn't super high, but there's three scores in there from early exits where he has not played the entire game, so they factor into his average in the discrepancy. So if you go onto the NRL Fantasy website, you actually be able to filter by minutes over and minutes under, and that's what we're going to talk about next in relation to what we call sample sizes. So essentially, Brenton, for our newer coaches, those that might not be familiar with statistical analysis, this thing that we have called confidence. And essentially, if you have a small sample size, so for example, a small amount of games that you're looking at, you're going to have less confidence that that is a predictor of future performance than if you had a very large data set and this player had, say, played 25 games in this position as opposed to 5.
So exactly right, and that consistency is where you can take a little bit more solace in the pick that you make, and it could be from various factors as well. It can just be from, oh yeah, he's been a consistent performer, but he's coming back from injury. So do I choose him from that? Am I expecting the same performance from him now that he's in a potentially a different role that he's only played 5 games in or something like that? So they can be a bit of a tiebreaker for you as well if you're choosing between a couple of players.
Yes, and the issue with sample size is that are small. They can be impacted by unsustainable statistics. So if we have a middle forward that plays 5 games in a season, scores 4 tries, or maybe even a better example last year was Danny Levi, who happened to score heaps of tries at the start of the season. It's not quite a base stat for him, even though it's a hooker. Who's got good footy now. And that's something we need to keep in mind if we're looking at a small sample size, that if we're seeing tries or line breaks or a lot of that you wouldn't necessarily expect from that player, that you consider that and don't just run off that this guy's played 5 games at this position, scored a 47 average, therefore he's going to average 47 there, when in reality it might be closer to a 40 or high 30s. The other aspect as well is having a relevant sample, because if we have a small sample size, it's not going to be high confidence. If it's a bit larger, then we might have a bit more confidence. But I think it's important as well, Brenton, that when we look at this sample, it's relevant to what we're looking at. Now, we've got a case study here, which I think is probably a good one for coaches to sort of understand as to why we want a relevant sample.
Yeah, exactly right. And James Fish-Harris is a super interesting one for this year because different team, potentially different role with extra minutes because of the other player who is leaving that team that he is going to. So it's a super interesting one to actually review.
Yes, now if we look at this example here, we're making this expectation he's going to play 55 minutes a game. Now, if we want to sort of maybe have a little look forward to what that might look like, we want to make sure that our sample contains some realistic cases of this, because again, 55 minutes a game, that's an average. So there might be some games where he plays slightly more, might be some games where he plays slightly less. So we might use a filter of over 40 minutes and below 60 minutes to reflect that, because we're going to get some games where maybe he only plays 45 minutes, but we'll also get those games where he gets the 57, the 58, the 59. The issue that we see sometimes be when we're looking at these is if we include games from outside this relevant sample, say for a middle forward we expect to play X amount of minutes, it might actually overinflate their average across this certain patch of minutes, and as a result we might have an inflated projection and maybe make a wrong choice.
That's it. It can also work on the inverse as well, as that you might have games in there where if you just put it as games under 60 minutes, it's going to include injury affected games where they might have gone out for HIA with 10 minutes. So it's important to use those parameters to put it in that exact bracket where you think it's going to be the consistent performance that they will do at the very worst.
Yes, and to quote the superannuation funds here in Australia, past performance isn't always an indicator of future performance, but again, it gives us a pretty good insight as to what we might be able to expect. The reason I throw that in there, Brendan, is we often talk about paralysis by analysis. And again, we love diving into the numbers and having a bit of a look, but at that point as well, we don't want to spend too much time because, at the end of the day, we play for fun. And also, you can spend too much time looking at numbers and there might be something completely out of control that renders that analysis irrelevant.
Well, that's it. And if you're spending so much time on it and it ends up being the wrong decision, all of a sudden you're not having fun and it's not the purpose of what you want to do. So, spend a little bit of time on it. And generally, the first choice is the right choice. And if you get it wrong, you can always correct mistakes later. So, yeah, just still have fun with it and don't beat yourself up too much if you made the wrong choice out of 2 positions, because they both could have gone, different ways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I don't know if we touched on it that much so far in this series, but luck is a crucial element in fantasy. And you need a lot of that to actually do quite well most years. Moving past the statistical analysis, though, keeping up to date with NRL news is a good way to go about it. So you don't necessarily have to have a newspaper subscription to News Corp or the like. You can actually find a lot of content creators, which we'll touch on them later, or even just the likes of Fox Sports that will skim those news sources and give you, most of the key news. So things that we want to know: players returning from injury, is a player looking at being dropped, maybe a player's been rested, because we know, Brenton, after a big State of Origin game when usually the Blues win, there's often going to be a few players that won't back up.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the other important one is always looking at that team list Tuesday for when it comes out, and the hour updates before, and even the 24-hour updates. So you are constantly on it to make sure that you have the best possible 17 scoring, week to week.
Yep, and that's where you can follow certain social media accounts that actually track those changes for you, so you can just get a notification on your phone and go, okay, yep, my player is no longer playing. I need to trade them out or not play them. And as well, you also see in NRL Fantasy, which we'll have a look at later, there's green, orange, and red dots as well that will also update throughout the round. Lastly, creator content. Obviously, Talking League, we're a creator within the NRL Fantasy space, but there is also plenty across Fantasy and Supercoach. And I think as well, Brent, we do encourage fantasy coaches to review other content creators because at the end of the day, I think it's good to get a couple of different perspectives because we might view a player a certain way, but another content creator might view them in a different way, which might actually help you broaden your knowledge.
Exactly right. Like we don't know everything, and even in amongst Talking League, we'll all have differences of opinion on why a player is good, why they might be a bust, why they're not going to work out, why they're going to be the next Nathan Cleary. Who knows? At the end of the day, you just go off the information and the research that you've done, off what you like to see, and then just back your decision. But yeah, as you said, there is plenty of other content creators that do it a little bit differently, and there's some really, really good ones. So if you need a difference of opinion and you're not really vibing with what maybe I say or you say or whoever, go get a difference of opinion and then you can make your decision for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about getting a little bit of knowledge and then executing that decision on your team. But
Yep.
that wraps up this episode. What are the takeaways for the coaches?
Yep. So making sure that you're understanding what you're looking for in that sample size and what makes the sample relevant. Again, the James Fisher Harris example was absolutely perfect because you got a prediction of how many minutes he's going to have in a new team with a new role. And then you can kind of work out what you think his floor is going to be from there. You'll hear us say in the fantasy game plan on the shows on Mondays that we just play for fun. New coaches, everything no one needs to be discouraged from growing this game. Have fun with it and also help those younger coaches and newer coaches build their knowledge up so they are then competing against you as well. It's what makes it fun. Keeping up with the news as well from various outlets, NRL.com, Fox Sports, anyone like that will give you the basic updates. And digest the content you enjoy. So if it's certain shows that you like listening to, it's going to be, if you're enjoying it, you're more likely to retain what they're saying. So make sure that you're vibing with that and then making your decision based off the options that you get given.
Absolutely. And of course, if you are enjoying the content here at Talking League Shorts, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Follow us on the socials. And again, Talking League Podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. That'll wrap us up for this one. Be sure to join us for the next one where we go into pods versus the Peloton. But it's bye for now.